socialism lived in harmony until liberals attacked. So a new generation of heroes arose to fight the liberals.
What? What does that mean? Oh, it's a meme? Sorry, I don't keep up with that anymore. Is Shrek still popular? I liked those ones a lot. Anyway, I gotta go. I'll see you around, I guess.
I'm sorry that we were born into this difficult and scary situation together. I wish the things I have to say to you now weren't true. I wish I could protect you from the pain of existence. Regardless, you are a brave and beautiful person to have made it this far, and I appreciate your presence. Anyways, hi. My personal experience with Breadtube goes back to before ContraPoints, hbomberguy, and PhilosophyTube were even a thing. When we only had people like anarcho-pack and libertarian socialist rants. I've been tracking currents in the space for a while, and wanted to share my thoughts and criticisms. I'd like to qualify some things. This is only my subjective experience of things. I think it is a bad idea to try to canonize one specific narrative as the story of Breadtube. I know you're probably here for blood. And there will be blood. But it is not my intent to shame any individuals, or posture myself as superior. At the end of the day, we're all just products of our life stories, monkeys on a rock flying in space, as they say. I only want to objectively analyze what is happening, and highlight behaviors worth leaving behind. I am not here to tear people down, but to uplift all of us.
I love my computer friends.
I'll be speaking about Breadtube as if it is a solid, consistent thing, but this is disputed, for good reason. It's just some label put on a shared viewer base among some progressive content creators. But for a moment, let's just pretend it's all of left-wing YouTube, from social democrats to Stalinists. I'll only be speaking about some people. ContraPoints, PhilosophyTube, Vaush, Hasan, Bad Empanada, and others, who exemplify the issues with a segment of Breadtube. Chances are, you like some of the people I'll be criticizing in this video. Me too. But it's a good idea to separate criticism of your favorite thinkers from yourself, as sometimes otherwise decent people are wrong. If you found one of these people helpful in your journey, that's cool. So did I. You should keep in mind though, that the people on your screen don't really know you, and they'll be fine without your support. We shouldn't allow ourselves to be driven by resentment, but instead by a positive vision of the future and how to get there. This was the one thing Jordan Peterson was right about, before he died on the toilet from shitting too hard.
Marxists have been scribbling their names in my copy of the book. I can hear them giggling in the other room sometimes when I'm in the bathroom. This is how propaganda works. It's how communism starts to look like a good idea to desperate young men, leading them towards their own destruction. So sad.
This is probably the only time I will talk about this. Then I will go back to talking about things that actually matter. We really shouldn't be critiquing each other like this, where feds can listen in, or using it to farm drama and clout. This stuff is meant for local dusty library backrooms, to resolve our problems equitably and move forward. But my hand has been forced. I'm going to jump into my criticisms right away. If something I said seems disagreeable, just know that I don't expect you to agree with me on everything. But I promise if you stick it out until the end, you'll have a few new things worth pondering.
Well, you're a fucking liberal. No way, man, you're the liberal. Laughing my ass off. They're all liberals.
For the purposes of this video, the term liberal is being used very generally to mean people who like things how they are, or someone who doesn't advocate the complete overthrow of the existing order towards anarchism or communism, but instead advocates a position that we need some improved social services while retaining some measure of liberal democracy or markets.
Take it easy, market fan. They're just anti-market memes.
Let's talk about ContraPoints.
No! Put me back. I was a niche internet micro-celebrity.
Honestly, that meme sums it up. Do I even need to say any more? I don't know this woman's life, so I'll just give my humble opinion as a member of the gang stalker community.
Daddy, what do you do for a living?
I'm a gang stalker. I'm a gang stalker, honey. We torture Americans electronically in hopes they'll commit suicide.
I have empathy for the things Natalie has been through, especially as a trans woman who has been through online harassment.
I don't think you can even imagine the extent of it if you haven't been in that situation.
But I still think we must speak plainly at this time. Natalie has always been fairly moderate, with her history as an Obama campaigner.
Capitalism needs the state to maintain its power, and we can change the state through electoral politics, so why not direct some serious energy toward that? Again, it reminds me of the NRA rhetoric about how you need a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. I still think that dethroning Trump by electing Biden is the single most important thing any American can do right now. No, you want to be heard by the people with the power to change things. It does matter who's president. It actually matters a lot.
She did as many philosophy majors do. Dropped out and fried her brain with drugs and alcohol for years.
And I will remind you, every minute, for hundreds of consecutive minutes, that your pain is optional. And I have the antidote right here.
Has long-term drug use made her opinions worse over time? Who can say?
Sorry I called you a dumbass. I meant it in a flirty way.
Through her various videos, some of which have been taken down, Natalie presents a good, if surface-level critique of why capitalism sucks and why bigotry makes no sense, with patience and empathy for an audience that isn't well incentivized to care to learn about the world's problems.
Maybe the scientists are right. Maybe it is happening. But to be honest with you, I'm having a hard time caring about this, at all.
Her early videos were unique in that they are often a dialogue between her and some imagined person, rather than a straightforward presentation of her stance.
So this will be a conversation with the communist Twitter cat girl that lives in my brain, Nia.
Regardless, it's pretty obvious what she thinks, and at times it's outright stated. She wants a liberal democratic transition away from the worst elements of capitalism.
Personally, I just don't want to live in a country where people are dying because they can't afford medicine. And I'm willing to pay however many taxes it takes for that not to happen. Why don't you use your privilege and use your education to actually do some good in the world instead of this elective revolutionary LARPing?
She wants an end to social prejudice. One problem with Contra's approach is that she defines herself and her brand as opposite to what she thinks radical leftists are. Where they are framed as loud, rude, and off-putting, she speaks in a measured and patient way, like a mature adult. I am not criticizing the patient, empathetic approach, specifically. If you can do it, it's often the correct approach for a powerless American to convince another American who's fallen for fascist bullshit. It is a privileged position, however, to advocate this as the only way, to look down on others advocating for more, and I wish she would acknowledge that. Many people all over the world live in far worse oppression and destitution than she does, to keep this system going. Many are dying at the hands of a global hegemony held in place to the benefit of people like her. To universalize the rhetoric of her place in the world, to people whose country is being actively ravaged by imperialism, is sick.
I wonder if because leftists can't seem to win on any major political stage, we feel disempowered. And so this moral fanaticism is a psychological substitute. A resentment ideologue always imagines himself to be engaged in a kind of satanic revolt against an omnipotent, omnipresent enemy.
To use your platform to tell working people to hold off, while you try to change rich people's minds, is demented. She has placed a great emphasis on being respectable, keeping up good optics.
That's a human rights violation! I'll smash your fucking face. This whole Antifa thing, I can't help but wonder, from a strict PR perspective, if there's some way you cannot do that.
She believes our reaction to oppression is making it worse, and she's made it her mission to show us the true way. I hate saying it like this, But this is very much a self-centered Western white woman's perspective. She does not realize the warped subjectivity of her position, that she is, and again, I hate to have to put it this way, living in the modern-day Nazi Germany and asking the Jews to calm down about it. These aren't the same thing. Of course they're not. But within liberal capitalism, millions die per year from greed and negligence. Yet we don't call that genocide for some reason. We even blame the victims. We can, and should, live in the present, with knowledge of the brutal reality revealed by the communist worldview, while still taking on practical compromises to meet people where they're at and change them. But that isn't what she does. She universalizes her method, seeing herself as better for not battling the oppressors more directly, when she is not in the situation that other people are.
Military men in their ranks, and connections to white supremacists within the police and the military. Whereas, when leftists talk about revolution on Twitter, it strikes me as ideation, not intent. It's a kind of fantasy escapism, an alternative to politics.
It's so facile, because this radical of the mind she defines herself against is someone who is ultimately correct, whose attitude is the one a rational person ought to have in the face of the sheer injustice of this moment, that if it were held in common, we would be on our way to utopia, and to disagree isn't a matter of fact. It's a matter of self-preservation, one undertaken by those comfortable enough to do so. Your society is a boot on the necks of the working classes of the world. Our situation calls for far more than being rude online. If you're going to be a coward, please do it quietly.
Can Natalie Wynn stop being a coward?
I probably just upset a few of you with that statement. And look, I understand. That's a pretty harsh thing to say. But hear me out. I'm not calling you a coward if you relate to ContraPoints. You're just some person. The issue is that she's a content creator, responsible for what millions think. Her responsibility is different from yours. Yes, she is just a person too, but she keeps trying to be a spokesperson, and in doing so, she opens herself up to criticism. This imagined radical might even be based on someone she actually knew in real life, as presented by the character Tabby. I don't know about you, but I feel bad for whoever this Tabby was, in Contra's life. To have a liberal getting millions of views making a bunch of strawman videos, presenting you as an incoherent cringy dumbass.
No voting. Smashing. So what's the plan? Revolution. Okay, yeah, revolution. I mean, you're right. Donald Trump is president. Fuck it. Revolution. We've got to get better people in office. We've got to vote in a whole different kind of politician, right? No, revolution. Yes, I know revolution, but what kind of revolution? Like Project Mayhem? Do you have any friends who aren't leftist militants? That's what I thought.
This is especially stupid because all the actual revolutionaries of history were nothing like Tabby. In presentation or rhetoric, she is purely a creation of Contra's delusional liberal mind, as well as reactionary conceptions of leftists as childish degenerates and violent thugs.
Ladies and gentlemen, a leftist.
So, actually, according to Hegel, the for itself can only be actualized through the in itself, so the individuation of the subject necessarily demands the transcendence of the dialectical object through the sublimation of negative materiality. Oh, fuck you, you fucking racists! Death to capitalism! Hail Satan!
I think that, at the time, many of us radicals adopted Tabby as our girl, but she was never made for us. We were so desperate for any representation that we turned a blind eye to Contra's blatant anti-communist straw man.
Well, what do you expect? We have the politicians against us, a media run by giant corporations, and a complacent white middle class that prefers order to justice. Opposition to leftism is hardly surprising.
Dear comrades, the Central Catgirl Committee has determined that ContraPoints is, and always has been, counter-revolutionary bourgeois revisionism.
Throughout her videos, Natalie has always been more anti-capitalist than pro-socialist.
I feel like a class analysis with only 2 classes must be overly simplistic. Capitalism is an epical world economic order. When you say end capitalism, you're talking about a tectonic shift in global politics that is so much bigger than all of us that I don't really understand what course of action you're recommending. I mean, are you even a communist? No, I'm not a communist. Well, why not? I like stuff. We have to dismantle the entire system. Burn it all down. I guess it's pedestrian to point out that this is the revolutionary utopian equivalent of Christians awaiting the last judgment. Our kingdom is coming, comrades. Has there ever been real communism? Problem must be critiqued at its root. And then the root turns out to be this universal, all-encompassing evil, right? Society itself, the system, the machine. And so far, 0 utopias.
She usually calls for liberal civility and a bolstering of the welfare state, but always stops short of any more radical conclusions, throwing her hands up in the air, insulting her competency, and excusing herself from the conversation.
Well, I don't know. Who do you people think I am? I'm a socially conscious YouTube entertainer, not transsexual Gandhi.
One primary problem she has in her early work is excusing her flaws by lampshading them.
Okay, listen. I know this looks bad. I know you think I'm bougie and you're here to take me to the guillotine. Well, fair enough. Now, does that mean I'm not gonna get a lot of expensive plastic surgery? Fuck no! What do you people think I am? Some kind of transgender Mother Teresa? Goddamn! The audacity of you people. You're a famous YouTuber whose class interests do not align with mine. Why should I listen to what you say? Oh, you shouldn't. I don't know why anyone listens to me, honestly.
Or hiding them behind self-deprecating humor.
Just kill me. Take me out behind the shed, put me down humanely, and just buy a new YouTuber before the kids get home and they won't notice. But also, I am a degenerate class traitor, and in my opinion, influencers should be the first against the wall. Honestly, I just wish you'd guillotine me quickly and get it over with.
Perhaps this is her transitory path to a better way of being, the same way irony is for some. It doesn't read that way to me, it reads to me as avoidance of responsibility. Sometimes it feels like she is mocking herself and others like her to make a point, but ultimately, she often doesn't present a better path forward for those she is satirizing. There was a period where she self-harmed by looking at awful comments online.
Sweaty, I am so used to reading mean things about myself online, most of you probably can't even begin to imagine how used to it I am.
She has at times been a confused and self-hating trans person.
But when I started this channel, I was a broke, gender-dysphoric, alcoholic, cross-dressing tragic mess. I'd play a clip, but honestly those videos are still too painful for me to even glance at. I was so ashamed of my attraction to women. There were days I thought the shame was gonna crush me to death. Oh, I wanted to be straight so bad. I'm a heckin' cat girl lesbian cum slut. Meow meow girl dick nya nya. Here's the 97th picture of my own legs and thigh-high stripy socks ooh. It's aggressive, intimidating, hyper-masculine behavior from a trans woman, accompanied by apparently total delusion about how she's presenting.
When this, along with her milquetoast views, were called out, she decided to create a self-indulgent spectacle out of various online cancellations, lumping in a lot of genuine criticism with the irrational mob, framing her detractors as naive Stalinist children.
But revolution to end capitalism.
Instead of understanding these waves of harassment as just the inevitable but sad result of her position, the result of a world filled with trauma she could never imagine, she has allowed it to warp her perception of her own political side and poison her belief in their vision of a better world.
Because, basically, my survival from here on out hinges on my ability to not care at all what people say about me online.
There's room here to speculate about state actors fueling and encouraging these harassment waves to alienate Contra from the left. And you could say it has worked, as her video making has slowed and she has become increasingly liberal and cynical about working class movements ever since.
And morality, ethics, and justice are often put forward as the respectable public face of private envy, vindictiveness, and hatred. As a general rule, the more radical a political community claims to be, the more likely it is to be a community of resentment. It's not about healthcare, higher wages, relief from police violence. Those are actual goals that could be demanded, worked for, and achieved. Utopian ideology instead promises relief from some general malaise.
I hope it's temporary. Her channel transitioned from one attempting to counter popular right-wing ideas to one focused on the self-victimization spiral of liberals who are being asked to come further left.
So, the reason for my current cancellation is
I'm a starving child, starving to death, and this is the last thing I've ever read. Goodbye.
And as it turns out, there is a massive market for liberals who've had someone in their life move further left, wanting to be told they're doing just fine, who flood to her community to comfort each other over their anxiety, rather than allowing themselves to sit with the discomfort of their wrongness and grow. Not all discomfort is a sign that you are wrong, but this time it is, and she has created the perfect space to numb it. I find myself asking, how deep will she dig this hole? She mistakes her ability to critique cancel culture for the ability to critique socialist revolution.
when the people have no bread, they eat the rich. And when the rich are gone, they eat each other.
She's illusioned that her words will override the material forces that drive revolution. It shouldn't be so hard to recognize the necessity of diverse tactics. She has also, in my opinion, bought into her own hype. Basking in the rays of her own success, she has become overly self-referential and stagnated over time. She seemingly cannot see how she has changed over time, which is understandable. I think many of us feel as if we are one consistent person even as we change quite a lot over time. Like many YouTubers, she takes refuge in the hug box of fans the algorithm brought to her, to bolster her ailing self-esteem. Like many, she mistakes success for being right. The truth is, in a world this messed up, you have to be wondering if you're doing something wrong if you're this popular among relatively well-off first-worlders. Her comfort with an ineffective reformist politics also cannot be removed from her Patreon success. The more material security someone has, the more they stand to lose from revolution.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching my video about how neoliberalism commodifies everything. I'm just a small lefty content creator on this platform, and you guys know how hard it is staying independent. That's why I'm gonna ask that if you have anything to spare at all, please donate to my Patreon, and let's defeat neoliberal capitalism together.
1 year later.
Guys, I have been blown away by your generosity. Thanks to your help, I'm able to improve my video quality and make even better video essays against capitalism. At this rate, we are closer than ever to a more inclusive, fairer society. So keep funding the revolution and buy my merchandise that just released.
1 year later.
Guys, I am so proud of how much traction this channel is getting. We are already at $10,000 a month. The bourgeoisie is trembling. Remember guys, install Raid Shadow Legends and level up those characters so they too can get strong enough to defeat capitalism. And go to nordvpn.com/JREG to hide from spooky authoritarian capitalist threats.
1 year later.
I am now a libertarian.
But I need young radicals like you in my life. The minute I stop listening to people like you is the minute I become irrelevant. Well, you know what? Since she's the one with the plan apparently, I guess just do whatever she says. But all you can do is try to get better. And I'm trying to get better. So look, I do understand that sometimes you just have to do a revolution.
Let's put a pin in that for a moment and take a wider view. What is Breadtube? I say this without resentment. Breadtube is made up of whichever people were moderate or normal enough, pretty and privileged enough to appeal to a majority in English-speaking countries. Their audiences are usually those who are still learning about progressive issues, or who are unconcerned with more foundational societal change, which is most people in places like the United States. It was usually this wide appeal that was behind their success, and while some have changed over time to become more radical, some have stayed to occupy that space of converting normies into social democrats or social justice allies. They provide an intimate personal presence to associate with their set of values, which range from social democrat to Stalinist. The kinds of work that get uplifted is typically stuff that meets normal people where they're at, and uses either pop culture or drama to teach about an issue many are curious about. Sometimes they represent a high-budget knockoff of work ugly, poor, or marginalized people have been doing for longer. Again, I say this without resentment. This makes sense given our situation and is a compromise with an imperfect reality. It's better for this to be happening than not. It's important to remember the scale of things here. Yes, when you get caught up in the sphere of Breadtube and online conversion, what we're doing here can seem very important to the success of left-wing politics in general. But when you zoom out to the scale of the rest of the world, consider that even the top English-language Breadtubers pull maybe 3 to 5 million views a video. No doubt a chunk of that is the same people as always. Then maybe sometimes those viewers change, and maybe talk to a few people in their life, do some activism. That's a reach of maybe 100 million people, max. That's a lot, but a drop in the bucket compared to the 7 billion people on the planet right now, most of them too repressed, poor and busy to obsess over what Vaush said, or how Contra didn't make the perfect video. Most of the socialist politics in the world today is coming from a grounded real-life tradition built on experience and compromise, not internet idealism led by white Western people. If you take nothing from this video, allow yourself to become disillusioned with the strange priorities many seem to develop in this space. Ground yourself in your local politics, and see Breadtube as just one small arm on a much larger movement. In the case of people like PhilosophyTube, hbomberguy, Sean, Renegade Cuts, and a few others, they seemingly rebel against the system, creating content that appeals to moderate people, but with an underlying core of radical thought and intention. They want communism. They are not illusioned that this situation can continue forever while they accumulate Patreon money and donations. They know the stakes are dire and there isn't much time. They know their job is to nurture their audiences into people who will see their jobs destroyed. The YouTube terms of service and monetization policies mean that any progressive videos that talk about controversial topics, or take a hardline left position, see less traction. Most people on the English internet are still on baby's first politics, struggling to accept that pretty much everything they've been told is a bunch of bullshit made up by tyrants, that they need to do more than vote for the lesser evil, and that to hundreds of millions in the world their country is the bad guy. So radical content just isn't going to sell to them. Instead, Breadtube content, if it is to accomplish anything, has to trick the algorithm into sending disillusioned normal people their way, who they must meet where they're at, while deploying clever framings to redirect people away from the typical black and white emotional understandings of issues, and educate them about the things they were never taught in school. These two forces combine to mean that it's hard to talk about harsh realities, or be explicit about what we're saying. The end result is a sphere of popular videos that reflect the least radical tendencies of our movement. Leftism watered down to incoherence.
Guess who's living through the biggest psychological operation in the history of mankind? It's you, bitch.
This can even lead curious people into thinking our arguments are bad, when the good arguments are being buried. One problem is when people circle this content sphere, and never make those final few connections, and take the next step. The next step, in my opinion, is to overcome the illusion of politics as personal consumer identity, to square idealistic politics with a sober assessment of history and our current situation, to regard with rightful skepticism the ahistorical tendencies overrepresented on the internet, to question the narratives about communist countries you were told growing up, to lose the initial arrogance of thinking you have the universal answer that hundreds of millions of other socialists missed. Yes, legitimate criticism can, and should be made, by those who have actually studied the history, but it is the arrogance with which people from anti-communist countries dismiss entire movements that is the problem. Don't get me wrong, our current situation is to be expected, and certainly some people make it out of the cycle. I know I did. Over time, Breadtube has become more and more saturated with people selling a particular left position to an audience, rather than crafting radicalization experiences that might see the viewer grow and move on from the channel. Often, those seeking fame and profit by confirming people's opinions will mistake success in that endeavor for being correct. In summary, under liberal capitalism, radical ideology is silently moved out of view, Or it is tolerated so long as it doesn't present an actual threat. Liberalism transforms all that is real and tangible, from human feeling and thought, to movements, into a detached and abstracted spectacle, to be sold back to us for our entertainment, distraction, and pacification. This is the one thing Peter Coffin was right about, before they forgot how to breathe and died.
Stylish vest, save hostage in a stylish vest, rip time in a stylish vest, civil war in a stylish vest, yeah. I'm looking great, due to this stylish vest. I'm looking great, due to this stylish vest.
All of this may just be an inevitable fact of our moment, but we still need to be aware of it so we can counter it. Next, we'll be taking a look at Vaush, a figure whose popularity admittedly eludes me sometimes. Algorithmically, he eclipses all the big Breadtubers combined, due to his combination of live and edited content. With this, he is able to comment on recent events sooner, have more raw video output, and get longer watch hours. His live work is also more intimate, so people form strong connections with him. If I were to try to say something positive about Vaush, it would be that he is pretty good about trans issues.
The left community online, particularly the LGBT community, is cancerous as fuck. If you're not an idiot, you will agree with me on this. If you have any fucking experience with online like LGBT or leftist discourse, you know it's cancerous as fuck. You understand this. People are hyper fragile. There's a ton of mental illness. And you can't convert these people. They're not reasonable. They have to be excised from the left. And it's because it's coming from dumb fucks who are gay. This person says they're gay as hell? Because it's coming from the gays. It's woke now. These people are less than human to me. I have no respect for these people. These people are fucking disgusting. You don't need to be a psychologist to see that a large portion of the broader fucking like woke-tard cancel culture idpo left is predicated on shared mental illness. This is particularly prominent in the trans community. If you disagree with me on this, you're wrong. I know it sounds yikesy. It happens anyway. Pretty much every time I deal with dipshits from the left that's trans girls, that I notice there's a vastly disproportionate amount of dumb fuck lefty takes in my feed coming from trans people. I don't know. Most of the time when a wildly fucking irrational lefty comes in to make bad faith arguments against me, it's a trans person. That is a fact. If all of these dumb fucks recognize that I despise them and think they're every bit as detrimental to the left as Nazis are, I am doing good. I want these people to know that they're my enemy. I fucking hate them. I really do despise them.
But they're not your enemy.
Oh, no. Yes, they are. They hurt me, and they hurt you. Because every time some dumb fuck trans girl on Twitter who's acting out mental illness, whining, calling people like me transphobic because I disagree with them, they're hurting the left. No, these people are ill. These people are cancer. They're subhuman. I don't care.
Question. You don't have to do that kind of shit. That doesn't help.
Yeah, I'm edgy. I don't give a fuck.
It's not just, you know that's not just being edgy.
Damn right. Yeah, it's edgy as shit.
No, making a reference to the Jewish question about how like there's like a trans conspiracy or whatever, like that's not just being edgy.
Oops. How did that get in there? I concede that what he is saying has some truth, but he's not being helpful about it at all. Also, I thought he did an okay job talking past Tim Pool and Charlie Kirk to their audiences.
A libertarian socialist is like a meat-eater vegan.
Libertarianism was actually a left-leaning ideology. It was co-opted in the early 20th centuries by capitalists, but actually before that, libertarianism was exclusively in the purview of socialists.
Vaush started off as a sad clone of Destiny in the debate sphere, except a bit further left than him, which isn't saying much.
I mean,
and you know what? I have a lot. You know what? I have at this point. I've got a lot of respect for him because you know what? The rioting shit might be the worst fucking shit that could happen in American history because it's the only possible path right now that Trump has to victory. The rioting needs to fucking stop. And if that means like white redneck fucking militia dudes out there mowing down dipshit protesters that think that they could torch buildings at 10 p.m., then at this point they have my fucking blessing because holy shit, this fucking shit needs to stop. It needed to stop a long time ago.
He is a great example to look at, as he exemplifies more than most the issues I'll be talking about today. I don't condemn debates, as some do, as useless or harmful. If nothing else, their strength is that they lure in many people of different beliefs, and that leaves at least a chance of someone hearing something that makes them think. I also don't agree with the notion that right-leaning people aren't worth recruiting. The more moderates and fascists launched into an annoying journey of self-discovery, the better. Regardless, and this has all been said to death before, but debates focus on rhetoric and posturing over substance and truth. Debates focus on personalities and fandom over argument. People are there to see their guy, and often tune out when the enemy is speaking. Debates tend to be run by centrists who favor the right by entertaining a false balance, when one side of the issue is clearly absurd, thus platforming and lending legitimacy to someone who otherwise might have just been a hateful nobody. Debates focus on entertainment and gotchas, owns and clips over being present and vulnerable with a person who faces a lot of trauma and loss, in realizing the truth about the world, who really needs a kind, patient conversation and education more than an enemy. There's clearly a reason why these tactics are popular. They create drama that draws eyes and encourages engagement, and so they play well with the algorithm. But if you take nothing away from what I'm about to say, just know that it's possible and even necessary to learn to deploy the veneer of a shallow dramatic tone, but to subvert that in how you actually create the content. Draw them in with the clickbait, hit them in the heart. But that isn't what Vaush does.
It's Ian. You're in a coma. I've been trying to get this message to you for years. From what doctors discovered in your dreams, you believe that I am some sort of internet celebrity, but I'm actually your husband. Please, baby, wake up.
For some, he is their first encounter with both Breadtube and anarchism, and often not a pleasant one. His anarchism, if you can even call it that, is not grounded in historical tendencies, but is typical of those radicalized online, a kind of high-minded idealism identified primarily against the failures of the USSR and other socialist projects, and his almost every advocated position is liberal and reformist to its core. Like many in his sphere, when pressed, he will abandon all radical veneer and take a position of building on what already is. With an astoundingly common lack of imagination, he will talk about reform positions that strengthen the ubiquity of the liberal state, as if they are steps towards an ideal future. This leaves his content lacking a clear answer to those asking what now, other than cooperative liberal markets. At time of writing, he's even been shy to advocate this. Vaush is not even that good of a debater.
I have two skills, and it's non-monogamy and speaking publicly, okay?
Pulling most of his advantage from being more informed than the far-right cave people he mainly spars with.
Wow, that's a little bit hot for me. Oh, God! Oh, mate! Oh, he said the word! Oh, God!
Sure, he's okay at rhetoric and posturing, but he's also ignorant of basic theory and history.
Oh god, fuck you guys. Guys, just so you know, hey, speaking of reading theory, just so you fucking know, just so you realize, when Marx and following theorists wrote on capitalism, they were not writing, capitalism and liberalism are worst things to ever happen to humanity. They are greatest oppressor of workers. No. Marxism is supposed to be an extension of liberalism, not a rejection of it, a true promotion of unity, fraternity, and freedom, and liberty and shit. That's what Marxism and that's what leftism is about. It's about bringing the messaging of the liberal movement forward to make it better, to make it stronger, to make it true to its principles. Leftists have never once won. Once. Against fascists once fascists take power. It has never happened.
Every once in a while he makes a good point well, but for the most part, he has the politics of someone who's never squared their online radicalization with a sobering look at socialist history. His politics often limit themselves to the local, the hypothetical, or the ideal realms he has crafted in his head to argue about, instead of scouring the treasure trove of knowledge that is the socialist account of history. It needs to be said that socialists have formed amongst each other a separate, more valid version of history. This is an understanding of the world where it is taken for granted that capitalism is bad and must be done away with, that communism must be established soon, against the wishes of the capitalist class, and that whatever mishaps happen in that process is better than simply allowing liberalism to facilitate the passive brutality it does. As you can imagine, this way of looking at things changes the way history is understood dramatically. Suddenly, most of the things that have happened historically which seem like unambiguous moments where the good guys had to stop the bad guys, look like the tragic victimization of imperfect people fighting to liberate themselves from the imposition of empire. Suddenly, socialist regimes look like complicated attempts to do the right thing under immense pressure from supervillains. The official account of history is often written by those who won, hiding the unsavory parts of the story, framing their actions as a noble liberating act. The capitalist ascribes their faults and vices onto communists, and ignores their own. They criticize our societies for their faults, but only one of us is actually trying to make things better, not just maintain a status quo. Vaush, like many Westerners, takes this warped version of history for granted quite often. His identity fluctuates in the moment, and is often cloaked in edgy irony. Sometimes he's a market socialist, sometimes he's a libertarian socialist, sometimes he's a liberal socialist, an anarcho-Bidenist.
Howdy.
He claims everything is a joke when it's convenient, such that you can never pin him down on anything, or hold him accountable. He jokes ambiguously about shit a serious radical shouldn't, like pretending to be CIA, or supporting Nazis in Ukraine.
I'm an informant. Why do you think I did Antifa work back in Santa Monica, you know? I was ratting out names, absolutely. We've all been informants, you know?
He often pretends to believe offensive things to annoy people, or turns the criticisms of those to his left into memes, to dismiss them.
It was satire. What were you satirizing?
Lefties joking ambiguously about being CIA is a bad omen. It threatens to create an ambiguous culture without the seriousness this subject requires, and it threatens to make the subject of addressing infiltrators and subversion equivalent to a throwaway joke.
I think I've been trending on Twitter for like 72 hours. I don't know why. Listen, whatever CIA, FBI, NSA handler that you think you're doing me a solid, you're not. You're creeping me out, okay? Stop, please.
Yes, I am fun at parties. There are hundreds of clips of him unambiguously saying shit that no left-wing person should even think of saying, even as a joke.
Or you pull the old CIA. You know? Real sneaky, real quiet. The other option is a coup. Morally, you know, if it was possible, if I could snap my fingers, would I coup Russia? I mean, would I, you know, let's say the CIA just sneak on in there and replace them with a pro-Western, whatever. I mean, I don't want them to be like pro-Western business. You know, let's just say somebody who's not Putin, you know, somebody.
Okay, so if you were to, there's pedophiles, right, who buy child pornography.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say they should not be held responsible for doing that?
Yes.
Really? Even though they're directly supporting child rape?
Yeah, I think it's hypocritical. If I bought my computer and the silicon in it was farmed in Africa by slaves, if I can do that and that's legal and no one's going to call me out on my shit, then yeah, I have to be consistent in that respect. Season 2. All right, are you guys ready for the mildest hot take in the universe? Okay. Super idpol, like lefty black women who are like really condescending to white people in terms of their ability to engage in political discourse. Love fucking white dudes. It's the exact same reason that racist white guys all watch interracial porn to jerk off to. It's the exact same thing. It's identical. There's no difference. When I'm alone with my girlfriend at night, when we're like high or whatever, I occasionally say the N-word. I say it with a hard R. Do I look like a fucking bitch to you?
But his audience will never fail to come out of the woodwork to ask you for the full context of the clip. It can't all be good in context, guys. Just take the L. I'm reminded of Jordan Peterson fans. Related, and kind of funny, I saw a Dangoid post a Vaush clip compilation, and when one of his fans asked for context, he posted this. I don't agree with Dangists, but I think this is a very good meme. This is one utility of memes. They can make bad ideas have a power and influence they don't deserve. This is something Vaush relies on a lot to cover for his lack of substance, for example, his anarcho-Bidenist meme. A human being isn't meant to have 1,000 contradictory chat voices in their head. speaking at them, reacting to their every move, canonifying character traits as memes. The relationship Vaush has to his audience has made him neurotic and unwell, especially over time, as is obvious to any objective observer. This isn't so unique to him, however, and is partially just the state of streaming. He's sometimes overly concerned about optics, to the point of not challenging his interlocutors on anything, or he'll abandon optics altogether, such as when someone to his left nicks his ego, by contradicting his white Western chauvinism, causing him to shift into bad faith mode, and hyperbolize the claims of fellows on the left to absurdity, instead of attempting to understand and build connections with imperfect people who he should mostly agree with. I hate to have to say it like this, but if you find yourself wanting to defend this behavior, I want you to know that you are in a cult that uses thought-terminating cliches and group identification to get you to have a knee-jerk reaction to in-group criticism. Even if you think Vaush has been poorly treated as a person, he got into politics. This is what happens. It could be much worse. He could be killed by those in power, which is far more likely to happen if his politics represented any kind of serious threat to the status quo.
I am pro-NATO now. I am. I legitimately feel like NATO and its existence really doesn't do anything to materially suppress the cause for socialists worldwide today. And I feel like the insistence on hyper-fixating on NATO from the perspective of a leftist has been a psyop in favor of the Russian government.
You have to stop thinking of him as your best friend, and start holding him accountable as a person with a platform. That doesn't mean being cruel or unfair, it means being part of humbling him. Like Destiny, he insists on using the aesthetic of being fact-based. In general, it is obviously good to base your beliefs on available evidence, and to regard academic disciplines and science. But a dogmatic attachment to only speaking about things you can cite leads to assertions that reflect only modular improvements to what is, and leave you only commenting on whatever liberal societies have motive to study, leaving out a large swathe of things worthy of careful discussion. There's technically proof that capitalism is bad, but in focusing only on proofs like this, people like Vaush can only argue for policy changes that improve capitalism, dodging the far greater philosophical question of, why are we arguing about whether a criminal empire that is holding us all in bondage might have a point instead of...
The Constitution is made up. The Supreme Court is made up. We could literally push all those old people down a flight of stairs. We are literally all choosing to play by these dumb rules.
In this sense, no proof is needed for the socialist point of view. We ought to present the absurdity that any capitalist cares about evidence and reason at the core of our critique of them, and bring up evidence afterwards. Vaush rarely does this. Remember, we're not trying to convince them. We're trying to convince their audience of normal working people who aren't financially invested in peddling racism, etc. Also, fascists don't care about facts. These are not people operating from reason.
Look, I get the appeal of trying to catch the right wing in hypocrisy, but it won't work. They're not bound by fairy law and will not be defeated by a trick. If they lived enough of an emotionally complex life to suffer guilt from hypocrisy, they wouldn't be right wing.
Trying to reason with fascists leads to absurd moments where Vaush is shouting stats at a guy who doesn't know his right foot from his left foot, when clearly a different approach is necessary. They need therapy. They need connection to someone other than their racist uncle. They need to realize their shared interests with us. Vaush's community has been shown over and over again to be a poor substitution for conservative ones. A lot of his new audience members come from a background of being right-wingers. He doesn't really encourage them to sit with the immense ignorance and arrogance that led to their previous opinions, how many people they have hurt in their life, or to comprehend how much work they have to do before they're worthy of having a voice in socialist politics. Instead, he seemingly encourages them to right away identify as true warriors of the pragmatic left, gatekeeping out literally all the socialists of history in favor of an ahistorical idealist American market socialism, alienating baby leftists from engaging with the theory that might help them find their way out of the sinkhole he has cultivated. When it comes down to it, he thinks that liberal reform will eventually produce communism, So he advocates liberal policy rather than something that more foundationally addresses the roots of the problem.
You realize that if we're just looking at like theory, the neoliberal theory, like propped up by the World Bank and the IMF, like these are unironically more complete and substantive and probably more reasonable policies for liberating a country than anything that the songs have ever written.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Neoliberalism?
Yes. Neoliberalism, for all the harm it's done to this world, functions. North Korea does not function.
You know why North Korea doesn't function?
Is it because of why? Imperialism?
Well, you know, they're sanctioned by almost every country in the world, and
Isn't the
US
point-
bombed the shit out of their fertile land.
He seems to think he needs to be the savior of the left and save them from themselves by being pragmatic, which for him means bending to the far-right Overton window.
How it feels to be a pragmatic leftist in a scene full of phonies.
All his wins are packaged into consumable video content. His failures are lost to all but the most obsessive. The end result is a space where you can really come to believe that the world can be changed through battles of reason. He becomes a hero to look up to, who unfortunately teaches them all the wrong skills for actually convincing and organizing people in real life. In this sphere, proving why racism is wrong in the marketplace of ideas, and debating and owning conservatives and moderates on minor policy proposals starts to look like what politics really is, rather than direct action, and finding your place in a growing struggle to overturn all that is. Eventually, the debate must come to an end, with a realization of the obvious truth. It isn't a debatable position whether or not humanity should be enslaved to an arbitrary class of rulers, and the United States should be named as one of the most evil and repressive empires to ever exist. Our job is to lead right-leaning working people to that shared vision. Vaush leads them to a belief in the redemption of a crumbling empire, desperately staving off coming to terms with its crimes. He insists on calling anyone who wants to actually do something tanky. A cringy tendency of online anarchists who, on the one hand, rightfully advocate for the highest vision of communism, but who on the other hand, are completely unwilling to engage with the unsavory realities of historical contingency.
Men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living.
Basically, what Marx is saying here is that people are products of their circumstances and environment, and so are you, and so you will create the revolt you can, not the revolt you want. To build communism, then, is not to call upon an ideal, but to take the imperfect masses, including yourself, and wield them to best effect, to build a society that can help them overcome their shortcomings in the future. In real life, people aren't rational actors, they're often misguided and upset, and their energy must be channeled. You need to win above all else, you must play the game, make compromises where you must be coldly pragmatic, must abandon typical notions of decorum. It's a lot easier to hold the high ground when your ideals have never been tested. From his various statements, he clearly finds communist revolution more offensive than liberal reform, often reducing historical communists to cult members, undemocratic authoritarians, racist nationalists. I have my own criticisms of Leninists as an anarchist myself, but not all critique is the same. For example, I don't peddle reductive liberal state talking points against historical communists. I recognize them as flawed actors within their context, and sometimes victims of regimes that, while flawed, were leagues better than the alternative, and were, oddly enough, often more democratic in structure than liberalism is, and took on many of their unsavory historical behaviors under mass repression. I try to encourage them to be better, to have a purer vision of communism, rather than tearing them down as simple enemies. It is hard to communicate just how reductive and arrogant it is, this way of tossing the word tanky around, especially by someone who lives in a country who has brought hell to every hopeful socialist venture for the past 100 years. In short, Vaush is exactly the kind of person you would think would be uplifted by a very misguided masses. A bundle of various unchecked white Western liberal biases, spoken with the ego of a man who would rather warp reality than ever concede some things. This isn't some individual judgment of Vaush, though I imagine it might feel that way, especially to his fans. All the ways that he is mediocre or inadequate are not unique. The market had need of a figure like him, and here he is. If not him, then someone else. No, I'm using him to talk about a kind of person in our current moment. If you feel hurt or offended by what I'm saying, it may be that I'm talking about you too. I don't blame you if you've been taken in by the spectacle of someone like Vaush. He is good at what he does. But you aren't bound to him, and you can decide to take in any legitimate criticism and move forward. Also, about the accusations that he is a pedophile or a deviant, it's quite clear from various evidence online that he's at least into horses and lollies or something. I honestly think he should just own it at this point, because it's really pathetic to watch his SOCDEM fan base pretend there is no evidence to this. And that it's normal to keep bringing up edgy scenarios about sexualizing children.
It is possible. Please, right now, uncuck your dumb shit libcuck fucking SJW brains and recognize this empirically correct fact that I am about to spit. It is possible for an adult and a child to have a sexual relationship and for it to have positive outcomes on the child as well. That is possible. In fact, and this is going to be a real hot take, I have yet to hear a convincing moral or legal argument as to why possession of child pornography should be illegal.
And none of them seem to care anyways. It's so obvious at this point, and it's okay, Vaush, there will be redemptive justice for you. Just stay away from underage horses and we're good.
And a tip for Vaush, stay out of teenagers' DMs. No good.
Let's stop for a moment and talk about what the purpose of Breadtube even is. There is a concept called the left-wing pipeline. Essentially, if Breadtube is working as intended, then people should be getting snagged on content that appeals to where they're at in their life, and brings them down a pipeline into a space with increasingly progressive videos, giving them a chance to stumble upon an unusually truthful video that snaps them out of their consumer and identity-based version of politics, and draws them into organizing in real life.
We should improve society somewhat. Yes. Yes! I need to get my life together, but I'm kind of waiting to see if the world is gonna end before I put any real effort in.
One issue is, if you don't depart from Breadtube eventually, your politics are likely to end up being based on aesthetics, attitude signaling, mind puzzles, and drama, not on the pragmatic and difficult realities on the ground. We already live in a time where we're so surrounded by propaganda and escapist media that it's hard to discern reality from fiction. The political version of this is terrifying.
Hey Tone, we're trapped in a pervasive fucking atmosphere that acts like some kind of fucking invisible barrier constraining thought and action.
Many Breadtubers, but Vaush especially, have clogged up the left-wing conversion pipeline as of late. I suspect that an unusual amount of people have stopped in their journey leftwards, getting stuck in the debate sphere, or in networks of essayists. And while you might argue these people are organically there because they have something to learn from it, that they will move on eventually. That isn't what I've been seeing, and I'm willing to bet others can confirm that acquaintances who watched Breadtube in the past are kind of stuck in escapism, without much of a clue what to do, other than to consume more content and participate in rather shallow exchanges of parasocial dramas and fabricated debates that rarely touch at the root of society's problems.
Hold on a second. Why is the Nicktoons Leninist on this list of cringe Breadtubers? Isn't he pro-BDS? Did he say a slur or something? Didn't he speak out against Chapo Trap House's ableism? I always found his Marxist critiques of Sonic Adventure 2 to be a valuable resource on my journey. I get why Chairman Meow is on the list after his well-documented history of fat-shaming, but the Nicktoons Leninist always seemed like a true comrade to me.
This isn't so unique, however. This is a general phenomenon with all of YouTube, because there are always those who chase the algorithm to serve people's biases back to them, rather than encouraging growth. You can't really blame the individuals, they're just chasing profit in a tough world, and making people uncomfortable is always a harder sell than you're right, and you always have been. The algorithm decides what kind of marketable demographic we are, and feeds us either videos that confirm what we already believe, or corporate centrist garbage disguised as objective truth. This tendency to lock people into bubbles of self-confirming information and make them feel as if they are a part of something is a primary matrix pod of our time. The initial success of Breadtube saw the creation of 1,000 sad clones with liberal tendencies, treating the dire matter of political propaganda as an opportunity for personal growth and clout. And with this, we come to the Leninists and the so-called anti-imperialists.
After 1 week with my Marxist-Leninist goddess. Sure, I'll join your cult.
There are obviously a lot of them, but I will comment on only a few. I've been through my problems with MLs before. They are the reactionary compromise with the flawed, illiterate post-revolutionary masses, an attempt to wield them to build a powerful state in the most efficient manner, by centralizing everything and giving people a plan and authority to follow, at fear of punishment, bolstered by an ideology of state worshipping. Ignoring that deploying such means will transform the people into alienated deferential state worshippers, who will not learn to organize themselves or express the political will necessary to realize actual communism. I personally disagree with Leninists on many important things. Primarily, I think it is stupid to advocate positively for the compromise itself, especially since we've no reason to trust the opportunists who got into power and told us their methods were the only possible ones. I think you should uphold the highest ideals of communism, but settle where you have to. But, putting aside my disagreements, the actual people on the ground who follow this thinking are usually genuine comrades, and we have far more in common with them than we do your average liberal. Only stupid Westerners living in the center of world terrorism who were raised on a steady diet of anti-communism think otherwise. And I'm saying that with acknowledgement of various flaws in these regimes, and their targeting of anarchists. Let's talk about bad empanada. Less of an ML hardliner, and more of a Che Guevaraist and liberation historian. He spends his time making genuinely informative and entertaining video essays on political realities you will never learn about in the empire. He is an okay resource at times, but the toxic layer of irony he coats himself in, to obscure his intentions, keeps him from genuinely engaging with well-intended criticism. He dismisses far leftists as childlike idealists, no differently from liberals. He has inflammatory opinions, seemingly based on whatever idiot social media brings to his attention that day, and his Twitter presence is unhinged, showing possible mental illness. He is so focused on looking strong and unaffected to others that he makes no room for the honesty, vulnerability, and suffering that we have to engage in as well. He suffers from the mistake of machismo posturing, which looks ridiculous over the internet, and dissociates to avoid accountability for his behavior. He mistakes describing history for describing the strictures of socialist realism, but at least he knows where this is going, and isn't trying to sell you false answers to our problems, like Ren and Nebula. A short aside. While Nebula is certainly much better than YouTube, it's a cool kids club that gatekeeps, like anything else, and siphons off a chunk of profit to a corporation. If it wasn't profitable, they wouldn't be doing it. I don't trust it as the platform of the future. My problem with Ren, as a platform that claims to help you spend to undo your carbon footprint, is that it makes the focus of the issue about the individual when the problem is systemic and requires dire direct intervention. It is a force to pacify and reassure liberals that a solution exists here in the current system. It helps reproduce the idea that capitalism can be preserved while we just change our ways. It is also a profit-based venture I do not trust, and will also not make much of an impact the same way #TeamTrees and #TeamSeas won't. If you're curious about why, there are lots of videos on Breadtube about it. I don't know as much about Hasan as I do about others, but I will say something short. Hasan is kind of useful, in that he's hot, personable and funny and has a wide appeal. I wouldn't know, I'm gay. But he's also, when you get down to it, kind of a vague principleless liberal socialist who insists that inordinate wealth is compatible with left revolution, and that we can't judge him for his expenses that reflect none of the principles or urgencies that a person with genuine understanding of our situation would have. Also, like many creators who get into drama a lot, he doesn't use his time in the spotlight to uplift real issues or blast out scathing anti-capitalist critique, just to self-obsess over his own haters. Like the other people I mentioned, he has crafted himself a hugbox community that helps reassure him. People will excuse a lot of hypocrisy just because someone is hot or seems like a nice person.
Heh, rent-free.
Then there are the people who are openly neoliberal, or barely social democrats, who have kind of gentrified left-wing spaces on here, posturing themselves as the real left, and all socialists as tankies for being illiberal. A term meaning, does not respect the rules and decorum of liberal democratic norms. Basically, stop resisting. Destiny being the biggest example, but he has like 20 sad clones at this time that add nothing new to the conversation.
Accumulation of wealth at one pole is at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation at the opposite pole.
They're fine with things as they are, because they're on one side of the pole, or they read the shit written by people on that side of the pole. There's not much more that needs to be said. To unironically defend things as they are now, to espouse the virtues of pacifist reformism and capitalist labor and property structure, is to be completely fucking disconnected from reality. As unfortunately far too many people are. Excuse me for saying this, but they are scum. It's one thing to be ignorant. It's another thing to be somewhat informed about some things and still be defending this shit. Then there's a small contingent of people who may or may not be actual state agents, like Has, Jackson Hinkle, and Caleb Maupin.
I am a Mongoloid. In my heart, I'm a Mongoloid. That is what I am.
They range from recruiting socialist curious people to the right, to making the left look bad by organizing them poorly, or just taking the side of some world power over another, posturing true socialism as being when you're for the right government in the global power battle. I don't know enough about these people, but I do know I have never seen them coherently explain their beliefs, and you shouldn't trust anyone who can't do that. And when they have explained their beliefs, it just seems like a bunch of state propaganda, removed entirely from on-the-ground working-class movements. You can check out Sophie's video on the conspiracy left for a more thorough analysis. Caleb Maupin in particular is well known for associating with right nationalist anti-Semites, and creating the cringiest movements imaginable that glorify capitalist productive forces in the fight for socialism. Also his book about how Breadtube is all somehow connected to big money or government intelligence.
Vaush, who's been appointed by Silicon Valley and you know, the video game Twitch or whatever, video game Twitch streaming or whatever, Breadtube.
The simple answer is that it makes sense that Breadtube is a bunch of ineffectual liberals, because most of the English-speaking planet is, including Caleb. I'm being kind of vague here. That's because trying to get a grip on what's happening here is difficult. It is all sort of vague, and any one of us can only see so much from our position. There is likely more to the story. And finally, we have recent converts over the years, like Shuan Head, Chris Raygun, and Hunter Avallone, all of whom are just algorithm chasers who figured out being a fascist hiding behind liberalism is a dying market, and have taken their edgy style of content, and lack of knowledge on anything, into the realm of progressive politics. What you'd hope for in situations like this is that they would reformat their spaces to deconvert all the audience members that they were lying to for years, but that isn't what's happening. They largely just co-opt actual left movements, and try to square leftism with reactionary social values. Hunter Avallone is still a sociopathic shitbag, but now he's pushing left liberal state talking points.
I just didn't imagine having to come here and explain to you, hey, the CIA is nefarious. Like literally the same intelligence community that was responsible for the overthrowing multiple.
If you don't trust the CIA, then who do you trust? If you don't trust like our intelligence systems, then who do you trust?
Are you serious? Do you genuinely trust the CIA?
I'm asking you who you trust.
75%.
Do you trust them? Do you trust them 50%?
Why the fuck would I trust the CIA?
Well, you said
I am a black man in America
What does that have to do with anything? What?
I would think I would trust the CIA, bro. I'm genuinely curious.
Wait, so if you don't trust the CIA or you don't trust like our institutions, then what do you trust? Who do you trust?
That are gathered through primary sources, and
Is the CIA not ever a primary source? Do you think maybe the CIA has access to information that we as the like regular public doesn't?
Lies for a living, Hunter. I don't know how else can I explain this to you. They lie for a living.
I just don't think you realize how silly you sound when you say, I don't trust the CIA, I just trust hard data. Like, how do you know, how do you find that? How do you go about, like, how, if you don't trust our institutions, then who the fuck do you trust?
Hold on. The same CIA that said Gaddafi was killing his...
Shoe on head, and Chris Ray Gunn still have not meaningfully grappled with who they used to be, and seem to act like the very concept of social accountability is unnecessary and insulting, and yet they want to come into our spaces and content farm. They have tried to rehabilitate their past actions by pretending they weren't fascist, but just had some reasonable concerns for the time. No. It has never been reasonable to be anti-feminist, racist, or right-leaning. Don't trust them. And now, for the worst breadtuber of all. Valium Sadfemme McGirl Boss. What I think it comes down to is that Breadtube started as an organic expression of human love for knowledge and propagandistic effort, and is slowly morphing into the shape of matrix pods for a generation of left-curious people to slip into, and spin their tires, and accomplish very little. As was demonstrated by the recent push of supposedly objective news channels, and the policing of fringe views, on these corporate platforms we are fighting against forces far larger than ourselves. Our efforts may not amount to much if corporate and funded channels overwhelm us out of sight. This is liberal capitalism's answer to the recent successes of Breadtube, the organic response I talked about earlier to counter the tendency to build revolt.
Me consuming 5 different forms of media at once to prevent the chance of a thought occurring.
I'm not saying people should operate like machines and just do activism all the time, but I am saying this plain and obvious truth that many people don't want to face. The only difference between you, with your mundane life of resistance, and a guerrilla fighter laying in the mud in a forest, is the emotional incentive and material circumstances of your life. In this sense, liberalism has pacified people, and it's done something more sinister than that. It's turned liberal co-option of genuine radical understanding into pacifying entertainment. Useful entertainment, but a phenomenon to be kept track of nonetheless. I hate to have to say it. I'm not anti-fun. I'm pro us getting out of this alive. In summary, bisexual lighting won't make up for the fact that you stand for nothing but the progressive wing of fascism. Okay, so what?
What do you mean you're pivoting to lonely posting? What does that mean? You just say these things and you... God damn it. Please, son, I still love you. Why are you doing this? You used to do little puppet shows for us in the kitchen when you were a kid. Remember that? When Mom was around? We'd all laugh so much. Please talk to me. Please. Dad, I'm gonna go ape mode on lunch today. Mask off.
If you've made it this far, presumably you think I'm making some sort of sense and am not just a mindless hater. If you've previously defended these creators, I want you to consider that a perspective of this depth was behind many of the criticisms you previously dismissed. It is not my intention to make you feel bad, but maybe feel just a bit of humility. Liberals, please join us. The right is mobilizing out there, and it's not looking pretty. We need you to win, and we need you to seriously reevaluate your previous positions. If you liked the video, wow, you did it, wow, baby, happy you did, baby, wow. Consider checking out my other videos which don't perform well, because they're just as good, but nobody will click them because they're not about drama. Also, I don't wear clothes on my Patreon. Uppies. Baby want uppies. Me want mama. Moment, the earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.